Hello, this is GeoTechlin, and today I'm going to be talking about the major news of Microsoft purchasing Activision Blizzard for $68.7 billion. Recently, Microsoft has been acquiring major gaming studios. They've already acquired Bethesda, and just overall, they're collecting quite a library of popular video games. Now, there's many ways to interpret this. The most charitable to Microsoft that I've been seeing is that people are actually happy because Activision Blizzard has been embroiled in some controversies. They don't like the CEO, and they see this as good guy Microsoft stepping in, buying all these cool franchises, and they're gonna sort of right to the ship here. And then there's a few that are saying, hey, I don't really like that Microsoft owns all these games, sort of having a monopoly in the gaming industry here. The most cynical way to look at it is that this is Microsoft's long-term plan to ensure that a lot of people still rely on their services or games. With the recently announced Steam Deck that could potentially push Linux desktop and Linux gaming to the mainstream, Microsoft is concerned. Gaming on Windows is what has kept Windows popular, or at least one of the reasons. The best case scenario with the Steam Deck is that in a few years, Linux becomes the dominant desktop. And of course, if you're Microsoft, you wouldn't like that. So how can you still keep people dependent on Microsoft and their services? By owning a lot of popular games and services. So imagine leaving Windows because you don't like how they violate your privacy, they track you. It's a dictatorship there where they tell you when you can update your software or roll out Windows updates. And then you leave to Linux, but then because Microsoft owns a huge portion of games, that then you have to rely on their services, like something like Xbox Game Pass. And then you're back to square one in a sense, because the worst case scenario there is that they'll be tracking you, data mining you, not giving you privacy, and you'll ultimately still be dependent on Microsoft. A lot of people might say, hold on, this is not the Microsoft of old. And a lot of people might say, hold on, this is not the Microsoft of old. They love Linux. Steve Ballmer's not there. But I always say, never let your guard down. Last I checked, Microsoft is still a publicly traded corporation where their goal is to not just make profits every year, but to increase them every year for their shareholders. Just the way it works. And that hasn't changed. And what sort of makes me cautious is that they've already bought GitHub, the hub for open source software that generally competes against Microsoft in Windows and Mac. And a lot of those developers are professionals, and they would use something like LinkedIn, which Microsoft bought. And then Microsoft has built coding software like VS Code that a lot of Linux developers like. And then Microsoft has also released WSL, or Windows Subsystem for Linux, that again shows that they're trying to coddle these Linux developers or open source developers. Now again, still with this sort of cynical approach, what I think Microsoft is trying to do is they're trying to again make people dependent on their services. So even though we're trying to leave Windows and Microsoft, they're buying things so that we can't. And then with this Windows Subsystem for Linux, some people may say, hey, it's very convenient. Now you can do Linux things or developer things without having to leave Windows, right? And dual boot, and it kind of makes it a bit more convenient. Back to the same point, how Microsoft doesn't want you to leave their system. So now if you're a developer, it's like, why install Linux and get away from Windows when you can just use Windows Subsystem for Linux on Windows? They're going to sell it as convenience. What they're really doing is keeping you dependent on their platform. Now, moving away from the super cynical approach, maybe the truth is somewhere in between. Maybe Microsoft owning all those games and having Xbox Game Pass, it's just them moving away from how they made money on Windows, instead of just making money by selling you a service. Hopefully all these games that Microsoft is buying remain playable on Steam and on Linux via Proton. My worry is that they'll do things to make them incompatible on Linux, or even just make it so that you can only play them on Game Pass, or maybe invent a new and improved rendering API. It'll be incompatible with Linux or Steam. So that's the concern there. Maybe it'll be a bit of both. Maybe this embrace of Linux and open source and them buying games might be good for Linux in the short term, but again, we must always remain vigilant, and at the end of the day, their goal is still to make money and keep people relying on their services. But let me know your thought. What do you think of this purchase, and what do you think of Microsoft's plans? Do you see them doing some good? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below, and if you like this video, please like, share, subscribe, and I will see you all next time. If you're enjoying my video, you can subscribe to me on YouTube, PeerTube, follow me on Odyssey. You could also support me on Liberapay, Patreon, and by shopping at Earth Hero. See links in the description below.